Greetings, magical souls. I had a question on one of my recent videos. That video was on a dream that I had that I felt was a little prophetic about the darkness starting to become more visible. But in that video, I shared that there was something around sort of bugs and flies and things like that. If you'd like to check out that video, I will link it here. So the question that I had on that video was, what about ticks and bloodsuckers no one talks about? I thought that was a really, really interesting question. So I read the comment that night and I thought, well, I can do one of two things. I can either tune in just to see whether I get anything on this, or I'm probably going to have to go around and try sort of in the way that I communicate with animals and try and go and communicate with like a collective of mosquitoes, ticks, whatnot, and see what I get and see if I can ask them a question. But it was really interesting. So I hadn't quite landed on what exactly I was going to do. But before I went to sleep that night, I kind of set the intention like, is there any insight that I can get into these so-called bloodsuckers? And I know that we have quite a negative feeling towards these poor little critters. And, I do feel, bad because I feel like every soul has a life, but at the same time, if I've got, ticks and fleas on my cat, they don't make my cat very happy. And in fact, they seem to make my cat quite miserable. So it's an interesting one. So there's always kind of this balance. And I guess it's the same when you have an infestation of, well, what we call an infestation of anything, be they ants or cockroaches or anything like that. So imagine my surprise the next morning that I come out and I'm in one of those waking whisper moments, and I have two things that really drop in for me. And the one is more obvious than the other. But the first one, obviously, that dropped in was that every being has a purpose. Absolutely everyone, even if we can't understand what that might be. And, thinking back to sort of when I used to live in South Africa, if we went to the game reserves and that, the oxpeckers would often be on the backs of the buffalo and that. So those are little birds, and they actually eat ticks. So ticks form part of the diet for certain birds. Unbeknown to me, I believe that mosquitoes can also actually help pollinate some plants. So it's very interesting when you start diving into the deeper meaning behind some of these, I guess, less cuddly creatures that we have on our planet. The other thing is that what's interesting is if you think about things like the plague or certain diseases like malaria, you think about Lyme disease or tick bite fever, those sort of creatures that carry those illnesses, they also have a bigger role in that they help to control populations. One could even say that because I might get malaria, and if I'm healthy and strong, then won't necessarily die from it. But if it's some creature or even a human that is weakened, you could almost say that there is kind of a cleanup. And from a human perspective, this seems really, really bizarre, but it could be this sort of a natural regulation of populations. Think about it like as maybe removing weaker energies or diseased energies, and then leading back to that whole thing about the breaking down. So if the bugs break down our physical matter to return it to the earth, there's again this almost digesting this death into new life, if you will. So that was the first thing that dropped in. And I absolutely believe that every single creature, no matter if we can make sense of it or not from a human perspective, has a place on this earth or in this realm. They definitely have a place. All of these creatures have a soul. They all chose, like we did, we chose to come into a human body. Maybe they chose to be a mosquito. I mean, we don't know everything. So I just always like to keep an open mind and go, if I turn around and from the point of I go, I exist here, and because of that, I am worthy, and I am worthy of, experiencing the joy and feeling the abundance, and just by existing, I am worthy. I have to give that same badge to even the critters that we don't necessarily like. Everything is worthy because it exists. So that was the first part. And that's the part I think that a lot of us kind of understand maybe on a deeper level, even though our minds are going, ew. But I think that we have that deeper understanding. Anybody who's sort of on the spiritual path and is doing the deeper work will understand that at some level. Doesn't mean you have to like it, but you understand it. Because trust me, when I've got a house full of mozzies, I am not a happy person. So, but we understand that. So that's the more obvious thing that just dropped in. Like every being has its place, and we don't necessarily have all the answers, and we don't understand things, even though we have a whole lot of science and a whole lot of information out there. We know from so many other things, as we've been uncovering the last couple of years, that there is so much that we don't know. So I'm gonna just park that one there for now. The other one, and I have some notes on this because I had to really tune into this because this was the interesting the second nugget that dropped in for me. The thing that dropped in for me was, what if these creatures only exist in this space, if I can call it that, where we have these distortions? And what I mean by that is that if you consider just the human being for a moment, we are meant to be love-filled, shining light beings that live in love and don't hate one another. And in the same way, when we live in this distorted sort of realm and this space, we have human beings that are energy vampires. We have human beings that are narcissists. We have human beings that are perhaps running around on the planet causing other people harm. So this was why this was such a big, I mean, it came in and I was like, whoa, I'd never thought about that. So that's what I mean by, do these creatures only exist with us in this distortion, in this space of distortion? In other words, if we were perhaps just, think about this, if we were just all of a sudden back in the Garden of Eden, everything's love and light, we remember who we are, we've returned to love, we're all coming together, would some of these creatures cease to exist? So that's really the question that dropped in. And as I say, I was quite surprised by it because I'd never really, as my human self, I'd never really thought about that. But so in the same way as maybe we've had animals through the ages that go extinct as we go through planetary shifts, and as maybe we have consciousness shifts, that kind of thing, and we have animals that die out, could it be the same for some of these critters, that in a more harmonious organic space, that these critters would all of a sudden cease to exist? And that's why I say this is quite a multi-layered and multi-leveled answer. So that was the first thing. And in the same way, you might even think about just a mosquito, for example, in the natural world, we could see as a pollinator, as I've mentioned, and then sort of doing like some kind of blood exchange, just because it fits somewhere into the ecosystem, whether we know it or not. But in hijacked or distorted system. We've all heard about the wanting to take the mosquitoes and mutate them and possibly give them diseases where they can spread things, or give them something where they can spread it to crops and things like that. But again, that's the interference of man. Even if you think about it, if you have like a very, let's think about this. So like you have a lake, for example, that maybe is catching the runoff from a dairy farm, for argument's sake, or whatever it is, some kind of industrial plant. And in that runoff that's being poured into this lake, that is now no longer a clean water system. It is becoming poisoned. It is becoming full of toxins. It is becoming full of all these things. If a mosquito now breeds in there, is this mosquito now kind of different to the one that was just pollinating and maybe part of this ecosystem? And again, this is because of, the things that sort of man has done on the planet. And then the deeper insight there is exactly as I alluded to in my AI video, where I said, well, is everything perhaps neutral? And the way we perceive it, like even our emotions are neutral. The way we feel it coming in, or the way we view it, is that merely a reflection back of our level of consciousness and possibly even the collective state of consciousness? So if we are now all of a sudden maybe getting these slightly mutated mosquitoes, maybe from these, where they are breeding in these lakes where the water is not pure anymore and the water is polluted, is that also a deeper reflection of how we are polluting the planet? Is that also something for us to reflect on? Are these animals being a reflection back to us of where we are going wrong and how we are even messing up nature? So these are all, that's why I say this is the second one that popped in for me was very, very, very multi-layered. And that's why I had to kind of unpack it afterwards. But I did want to share everything that came in, because I think it was a really, really, really juicy question. And I really think that we're at the point where we need to start. This is the consciousness. This is us really thinking deeper into things, instead of going, oh, how can I make my lips big? Or should I be worried about what I look like? Or, this is the stuff really that I feel is going to evolve us in our consciousness. And if we can really sort of start looking at all creatures, I've always said this, if we can start looking and understanding that the animals around us, like our companion animals or wild animals, the ones that we actually like, if we can start looking at them as souls in different bodies, imagine how that just dissolves sexism, racism, all of these kinds of things. So in the same way, I go, are the animals again helping us to really evolve our consciousness? Even these little animals and these little critters and insects and what have you that maybe we don't really like, because remember, everything is connected. So I guess the things that I'm sharing here, you can draw your own conclusions from and see what resonates, because I'm just sharing what dropped in for me, what I unpacked. But as I said early on in the video, I still don't fully know, and I don't have, I can't prove it. I can't come on here and go, this is why we have them. And that's not really my job. I'm not here to prove anything or whatever. I'm here to share my insights and what drops in for me when I try and tune into the questions that I get asked. So lastly, just on that, my question for us would be, have some of these critters also evolved in these less than pure environments in response to our collective shadow? So that was the one thing, like, wow, are they here because because it's like the darker part of nature almost, but it's mirroring back our dark parts. It isn't nature. It's a mirror, it's a reflection. Okay, so that was the first one. And then the other one was that I think that we are creeped out by these guys because they are seen as bloodsuckers. Now, if you think about the fact that we know our breath is what gives us life, the prana, the chi that flows through the body, that is the main thing. But we also can't survive. The other thing that we can't survive without is blood, because that is circulating through our body the whole time. So that for me is, it's almost like it's a part of our essence. We can't be dry husks running around and just be surviving on breath. Well, at least not now. Maybe as a new kind of body or whatever, but not where we stand right now. So it's um it's it's almost like I feel like there's a connection where we get freaked out by these bloodsuckers because it's like they are taking the life from us, like there is some kind of connection there. When you just see a little bug or whatever, you might be less freaked out by that than the ones that come and drink your blood. Because then we start thinking about vampires and all sorts of things. But it is part of our life force. And so there is this association with this literal them sucking out, whether it's our animals or us, like sucking out our part of our life force. And I think why that hooks so deeply into us is because we're starting to realize how we have been fed off for we don't even know how long this has been going on. We are the batteries that others have been feeding off and other entities from the astral realms. So I think that maybe there is something stirring within us where it's kind of might be buried a little bit more subconsciously, but are we are we having something stirred within us that's reminding us that we are actually being fed off all the time, but these creatures are almost making that visible again? So there's a deeper thing. It's not actually the creature, it's that it's stirring something in us, a remembrance, and it's kind of like when you start waking up and all of this stuff seems like a little bit far out, and you start to feel like you like losing your mind. But when you start to realize that everything's energy and that we really have been the batteries, if you will, for this whole artificial system, I think that is what that is actually hooking into. I mean, that's at least what it felt like for me, and it might be different for you. But that was one thing that I just wanted to throw out there. And then also you have that was one of the first things I spoke to again is when you have an energy vampire around you. So somebody around you that feels like you leave them and your energy's drained and you don't feel good afterwards. So it's also having people around us that we suddenly don't feel well around. But again, that little blood-sucking creature is almost just tapping into something that I guess really is awakening us to, awakening our awareness and our consciousness and going, hey, I really don't feel good around that person anymore. Maybe I shouldn't be around them. Because remember, as we change, a lot of these things that happen and the people that are around us, it's for us to step back into our power. Those people aren't doing anything to us. We are allowing it, but maybe we get to a point where we are different, and then we just go, okay, I don't consent to this anymore. I don't agree to it, and that's how we evolve. And that person might just be there to show you something about your boundaries or whatever. So it's not necessarily that that other is negative. It's just it's all reflections and it's all stirring ups. And I believe all of this is helping us to expand our consciousness in some way, shape, or form. And so, last note on that is that these creatures are the all your little bloodsuckers. And I mean, this goes further than just ticks and fleas and mosquitoes. You think about leeches, because leeches are actually, I believe, in the old days specifically, they were used to pull poisons out of blood and things like that. So, from a medical perspective, a lot of people in the old days, from what I understand, if they had like blood poisoning and that, leeches were the things that actually extracted all of that. So there's always a positive side to this. And I think that these creatures, none of them are evil, none of them are awful, even though they might be here, as I said earlier, in this space with us just because we've become distorted and they are mirroring that. What they could also be is just they are manifestations in the physical of what's been going on in the unseen. And that's what I was just talking about, the fact that we have been fed off now. We're realizing that our energy has been fed off for, longer than we actually know. And we're just really starting to wake up to that fact. So that was the deeper message there. And so the last thing I wanted to say on this is that at the end of the day, because everything's interconnected, they, like us, like everything, are all part of the story, just like the light and the dark's part of the story. So some of these bloodsuckers might be teachers because they're reflecting things back to us that we need to change. Or they are somebody in your life that might be showing you where you need to have stronger boundaries or learn to say no or stand up for yourself or whatever the case might be. Some of them may even have evolved from love because if you think about it, some of there's a belief that maybe some of your soul family chose to be a really antagonistic person in your life to help your soul evolve. So, could some of these creatures also be creatures of love, creatures that come from our soul family? I don't know. I mean, it raises your question raises more questions than I can possibly give you answers to. But they're all really, really interesting things to just chew on. So I think that some of us, in the same way, have evolved from our forgetting and from our amnesia and from our going into slumber. At the end of the day, all of them are part of the story. And so that kind of brings me back to that first point where everything has its place. We know there are no accidents, everything is part of source. And those are really the two things that dropped in for me. And I think that this is an important question because I think that by looking into these things and expanding our consciousness out by trying to understand them, this is really how we liberate ourselves. We liberate ourselves from this system. We liberate ourselves from the darkness because we learn to look at it. We learn to really look at these creatures that maybe are giving us the heebie-jeebies. I myself have a phobia of spiders. And lately, if I find one in the house, I'm trying to tune into it. I'm trying to communicate with it. I'm trying to understand why I am so frightened of it because spiders have not done anything to me. And what's interesting here is that spiders are, I know a lot of people are scared of them. They got 8 legs. They look quite strange and they're always again using them in movies. I mean, whenever there's something bad that's going to happen, there's bugs, and most of the time, 9 times out of 10, there's some massive spider that is spinning everybody into a web so that they can eat them later. So it's again with these connotations. But what's interesting for me is that I can remember a time as a child where I was running around picking up spiders and I'd bring them into the house and I'd look at them and whatever. And then I'd go and put them back outside, or I'd spend hours digging in the soil and picking up all these bugs and creepy crawlies and just sort of being with them. So this is a program or something that's come in for me. And I remember that. I remember not having an issue with spiders. I remember not having an issue with bugs. And I don't actually mind any little critter besides a spider. I've really got to work on that. I love jumping spiders. And I go, there's something really, really, really seriously like screwed up with the programming where I can, the jumping spiders, okay, but all others, I'm almost like immobilized with fear. So I'm really trying to work through that. And again, I go, well, what is that fear trying to teach me? What is it about the spider that I don't like? And what is it about the jumping spider that I find all cute and sweet? And I mean, I actually don't have my own answers at the moment. All of this is very interesting, and I think if we can come at it from a curious mind, we might just each find the answers for ourselves. I do feel that as we step through this, as I say, it's the consciousness, it's the awareness, it's the curiosity, And almost in the same way I've said we need to really return back to the cycles of the seasons, the cycle of the moon, the cycles of nature. These little critters are all part of nature. So they are part of us returning to nature, returning to ourselves, because we're also part of nature at the end of the day. And restoring that relationship with the natural world that has been so distorted and so messed up. You just got to look at the way so many people still treat animals, and you can understand how far we have fallen in terms of our connection with the natural world. To me, these little critters are part and parcel of that. And I guess at the end of the day, if they are something that has almost evolved in with our shadow, I guess at the end, when all is said and done and we find ourselves in new times, we may find that they will either evolve to become something different, just like we are evolving as we return to what our natural state is, or they will be taken care of by nature. They'll be taken care of by source. And that's not really up to us to decide. But it's very important because we don't get to decide what lives and dies. We don't get to decide what's evil and good. We don't get to decide what's light and dark. Everything has its place, and we don't have all the answers. And I think that's why having a curious mind for all these things is really, really important. So I hope that has answered the question. Well, it's probably raised more questions than I've spoken to here, but hopefully that's given everybody that's listening to this a little bit of food for thought. And maybe in making videos like this, that is even a step in just how we treat the little critters that we don't really like. I mean, imagine if we can start treating the critters that we don't like with a little bit more care and a little bit more reverence and a little bit more understanding. Can you imagine what we could do with the things that we do like? So it's really an interesting place to be at this time on Earth. So anyway, I hope that has helped. Let me know if you have any more questions, and I'll try and tune in. I actually have a whole lot of wild animals that I am wanting to tune in with in the coming weeks. I have a list of things that I've been drawn to, and I will be sharing those videos as I tune into them. But I'm very excited about what I've got up my sleeve, let me just tell you. So I think maybe I need to put one or two of these little blood-sucking creepy crawlies on the list. Who knows what they might be able to share with us. Anyway, thank you all so much for being here and for watching, and wishing you all a magical rest of your day.